Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella, window and door of Georgia. We are so happy to have you with us coming off what I thought was really entertaining G-Day on Saturday. You know, a lot of the G-Days over the years kind of blend in, and I don't know, one sort of, kind of gets confused with the other. But I don't know how often I have been as entertained by a G-Day as I was the one on Saturday. More points in the first half there was in the second, so I guess you say a little something about that. But I thought we learned a decent amount on Saturday. I think most of it was actually pretty good. So give us a few days to break all of this down. We're going to kind of focus mostly on, from a G-Day subplot standpoint, mostly on quarterback today, but we'll kind of eventually get to some of the other stuff here over the course of the next few days. It'll take us a few days to get there. We'll obviously talk about the Bear Alexander thing, pretty heavy off the top of the program. And oftentimes it's been said that the team takes on the personality of its coach. Well, in this particular case, I think the entire Georgia fan base ought to take a page out of Kirby Smart's book here in terms of how he viewed what happened on Saturday in light of the transfer news that sort of started off like it might mar the entire day. Smart's words very, very poignant in light of all of that. So what do you say we begin with that? We'll bring on John Stinchcomb as well. We'll have some fun at the expense of those lousy stinging Gators. And wait till you see one of the really cool additions that Georgia put on its national championship rings. This is really fun. If you're a dog fan, you're going to love that there as well. So all of that is coming up over the course of our time together. Glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella, window and door of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella, window and door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So to bring you behind the curtain a little bit, I was driving to Athens on Saturday afternoon and getting ready to go do our Kroger kickoff. That was going to be our first show of the day to lead into G-Day. And I sort of thought, because right as I was kind of pulling in the parking lot, we became aware of the fact that Branson Robinson, the running back, wasn't going to play. Smile Mana wasn't going to play. And I sort of thought that was going to be the pregame story. So as we're getting ready to go on the air, we're kind of building a show around the idea of, well, I guess you better expect Georgia to throw the ball a lot more because Branson Robinson's not going to be here, not going to be participating, and so that kind of changes a little bit of the complexion of the game. Georgia one fewer, healthier running back we thought it was going to have. And so you're kind of building the pregame show around that. Then lo and behold, boom, just as we're getting ready to go on the air, you find out, no, there's reports out there that Bear Alexander, the Georgia defensive tackle, is going to transfer. Transfer portal window obviously opened on Saturday, April 15th. It'll run through April 30th. And then you find out, no, here's this, fan favorite, popular recruit, former popular recruit, a guy who had a couple of sacks in the national championship game, a guy who had some expectations for him here this year in a Georgia uniform. You find out that he's transferring. I don't mind telling you, that really bummed me out. We'll get into kind of more of the specifics of the situation, but what kind of bummed me out initially is it's this beautiful day in Athens, a chance to see our first look at the 2023 team, and you've got this news kind of falling out of the sky. And I thought there was a little bit of a fear that the Bear Alexander transfer news might end up marring a day that we've been looking forward to for quite some time. G-Day, the conclusion of spring practice, a time for us to all get back together. Some of you could do your tailgate stuff. You kind of go out to downtown after the game's over with. It's sort of a chance to be back in Athens for those of us who don't live there, a chance to kind of do something that feels like Georgia football. Not until the fall again when we get a chance to do that. And, we're going to do that on Saturday, and you have the Bear Alexander news. Now, here's what I'm happy to report. That my initial fear about all this, that, oh, gosh, the Bear Alexander news, this is going to mar G-Day. If you were there, did that happen? I would say it didn't. If you're watching on TV and kind of following this stuff on social media, would you say that the Bear Alexander news ended up kind of overshadowing G-Day? I think you'd probably join me in saying that it did not. That the Alexander news is substantial, and it certainly generates a lot of opinions, and we'll get there, you better believe, here in a moment. But overall, whatever the Alexander thing was, I don't think it ended up being a bigger deal than the fun of watching this 2023 team compete on the field, bringing to the conclusion what seemed to be a great and spirited competitive series of practices for Georgia over the course of the last few weeks. And, we play a lot of Kirby Smart audio clips and things like that here on this show. The one I'm about to play for you, I don't want you to miss. because I think the way that Kirby Smart describes his feeling of where he is post-spring, this ought to be the mood of every Georgia fan there as well. And so if you're tempted to want to kind of get wrapped up in the Alexander thing or wrapped up in something else, I think that Kirby Smart set the perfect tone. This was the very beginning of his post-game press conference on Saturday. Obviously, today and over the course of the next few days, we'll break down the specifics of what G-Day was, what maybe we learned, getting a chance to see all of this with our own eyes. But for now, nothing is more important than Kirby Smart being asked, hey, after 15 practices or however many it was, after seeing this team go out and participate in this spring game that the entire, world got to watch on ESPN and everything else, how you feeling about your team here? You're back-to-back national champions. You got a chance to go for 3 and 23. Kirby, post-G-Day, post-spring practice, how you feeling about your team? And Smart's words have a lot of extra poignance in light of the fact that Bear Alexander's packing his bags for somewhere else. This is Kirby Smart, strong words post-spring practice on Saturday.
I'm excited. I've always said, we're built to sustain here, and that's my motto. We're not trying to be a one-hit wonder. We want to put a really good football team out there each year, and we're well on our way to doing that this time. We've probably got the most cohesive unit we've had in terms of the guys love being with each other. They like practicing hard. I mean, we had 14 of the 15 days. I really thought we had good practices, and that includes today. And I was really pleased with their work ethic. So, they like practicing, they like football. When people come to your practice and they've been to 7 other schools and they say, man, y'all get after it. Man, your guys practice hard. Man, your guys buy in and have fun. It makes me feel better that our kids enjoy it.
So listen, I think it's almost worth rewinding that back and just listening to that again if you wanted to, because Kirby Smart gives you so much there that if you're a Georgia fan, you got to sink your teeth into. Smart says, listen, I'm excited about my football team right now. And it kind of goes into all the reasons why. He talks about the fact that he believes that Georgia's built to sustain. What that means is that not only is Georgia potentially able to withstand whatever competition comes on the field right now, we also know that college football is in the midst of a pretty significant series of changes. And what Kirby Smart says, we're built to sustain. We don't have plans on being a one-hit wonder. What Smart is also saying there is we think we're built to withstand all of the change that's happening around us. The way in which NIL and transfer portal are impacting the sport, the way in which an expanded playoff is going to impact the sport, the way in which SEC expansion is going to impact the sport, the way in which new SEC scheduling models to kind of make up for 2 new teams coming to this league, the way that's going to impact the way in which college football is played. Kirby Smart says, we think we're able to handle all of that. And while change can make some people nervous, it doesn't make Smart nervous. He says, right now I'm excited about all of this. And for a program that just won 2 national championships, you could certainly listen in on Kirby Smart right there and think, hey, he actually may think the best is still yet to come, that Georgia can go for 3 and 23 and then do whatever comes after that. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you ought to take a page from that. But specifically, there's this, especially in light of losing a player who kind of put his own name out there and, in a way that not every Georgia fan liked on Saturday. Smart says, hey, listen, this is the most cohesive unit we've had. Now, last year, he told you that the level of connection that team had was better than anything he'd ever seen before, and obviously a big reason why they won the national championship. And he's also beginning now 2023 after some spring practice saying, man, I love how cohesive our team is. Big fancy word, but just the idea that they're connected, that they're working well together, that everybody seems to be kind of getting along well together. Smart saying this team is cohesive in light of a pretty high-profile transfer, a guy raising his hand up saying, hey, I want to go somewhere else. Smart seems to be saying the guys who are still here, man, they're connected, they're into this, and they love practicing. They love their work ethic. You've got all that from Kirby Smart there. If you're a Georgia fan, I think you've got to really, really like that the overall culture around this Georgia team, even with the transfer portal open, even with some guys looking around, even with some guys being tampered with over the course of the last couple of weeks, hey, come here, we'll give you some money. Come here, and you can have a bigger spotlight on you. Come here, and you can get some glory that you were never going to get at Georgia because you're blended in to another talented roster. We desperately need you, so you'll get a lot more credit for what you do here than you are at Georgia, whatever negative pitch against the Dogs that opposing programs have been given. In light of all that, Smart says, I'm as excited as ever. We're as built to sustain as ever. We're as cohesive as ever. We're working just as hard as ever. And the guys who are still here are as into this as they've ever been. if you're a Georgia fan, I don't know how you couldn't love that. Obviously, I think that you probably do. But then specifically on the idea of Bear Alexander, and I promise after this we'll do G-Day both today and for the next several days, what we saw on the field. Smart was also asked, directly about this. Transfer portal window opens. We're in a day and age in which that's just kind of a part of college football. Smart doesn't mention Alexander by name here, even though he was asked about it from our buddy Mike Griffith. But he does acknowledge the reality of the moment that Bear Alexander, in this particular case, seems to be just simply leveraging the system that's in place to benefit players right now, and Smart sort of seems to be fine with it. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart on that topic from Saturday.
Yeah, that's the way of the world. It's who handles it and manages it best, and it's basically the new climate we're in. So the window will open up. All across the country, there'll be guys going in and looking for greener pastures, and that's ultimately the climate that we have created. And there's more power to them. We've got a lot of guys who've benefited from the portal, and I hope we benefit from the portal. We had a couple guys out there today that came by way of the portal that made some really good plays. So it's the climate that we're in, and we'll do the best we can to capitalize on it. But I'm very pleased with what we've got on our team and our roster, and it's not a way that we're going to build a team by any means.
By the way, nice look at the G-Day dog walk on video. For those of you watching on video, great to see Brock Bowers walking that rope line there and high-fiving so many Georgia fans. But Smart says, hey, we're not going to build our team to the transfer portal, but we are going to use it, and we're going to acknowledge that sometimes players are going to leave our program there as well. So Smart, very realistic about what the cost of doing business in college football is here in 2023, and I think that his words there are very, very measured and very, very wise. Now, when it comes to the Alexander situation and the college football system that allows all of this to take place, I think if you're a fan, you probably have every right to feel however you want to. And we've heard from some people who are like, hey, good for Bear, go get your money, if that's indeed what this is, a transfer to leverage NIL opportunities. We have some reason to believe that it might be. If that's what this is about, then there's some fans who are going to say, hey, go out there and get what yours is. There are going to be some people who say, I hate all of this. This is too much change too soon for a sport that I've loved for the entirety of my life and a sport that's thrived over the course of a century. And there are some people who are kind of, bothered by some of, that. I think you have a right to sort of, kind of feel that way as well. I mean, listen, here's what I'll tell you. The other day when A.D. Mitchell announced his transfer to Texas, we talked about that on the show. Weren't thrilled about losing Mitchell either, but we felt like that Mitchell had been a big part of a national championship story for Georgia in 2021. And from that standpoint, we said Mitchell, as he leaves and goes out the door, to us, he was a DGD, a damn good dog. And we kind of defined that as someone who, worked to leave Georgia better than he found it. I don't mind telling you that I sort of view the Bear Alexander situation a little bit differently. And so, I am going to take a little bit more of a negative appraisal of Alexander in this situation. And to me, the difference between A.D. Mitchell's transfer and Bear Alexander's transfer is the difference between a maker and a taker. I feel like what A.D. Mitchell did was help make Georgia better than he found it by having a huge contribution in that win against Alabama, a touchdown to give Georgia the lead that ultimately resulted in that victory against Alabama and Georgia's first national championship in more than 40 years. Now, Alexander himself is also a part of a national championship team there as well, but when you look at the last 12 months for Bear in a Georgia uniform, it's fairly obvious that he got a lot more from Georgia, development and training. He got a lot more from Georgia than he ever gave to it, and that's just a fact. And so now he goes to a place, and the internet would say it might be USC, so let's just use that as a hypothetical for instance. He goes to a place like that, benefiting from the training that he got from Georgia over the course of the last 12 months, and if Lincoln Riley and USC were capable of providing that to him, they already would have. When's the last time you saw Lincoln Riley put any kind of top-flight defensive player into the NFL? The next one will be the first one, I believe. The same thing is true for the Pac-12 there as well. That's an entire league, frankly, an entire portion of the country that doesn't do much by way of playing defense. And if that is indeed where Bear Alexander's going, then it's one of those things where he might eventually regret that decision. And in this current world in which we live in, noticing all of this is going to be fair game. Who comes to Georgia? Guys like Jalen Carter is going to be likely drafted in the top 5, the top 10 next Thursday. 3 first-round defensive linemen last year. Track record for success. And for guys that either don't go to UGA or come to UGA and don't stick it out because it gets too tough or whatever the ultimate scenario is, going somewhere else, and if they don't thrive quite as well there, team success, individual success, if they don't thrive quite as well there as they did at UGA, it's going to be fair to notice that in the future there as well, that college football is starting to function a little bit more like a business. And when things are like a business, that means it's not personal, it's just business. And noticing who's doing business the best is fair game in all of this. And no one's doing business better right now than UGA is. But that cost of doing business at a place like Georgia is not going to be for everyone. Apparently it wasn't for Bear Alexander. But Dogs don't seem to be sweating his departure whatsoever. Still going to be preseason number 1. Still going to be the prohibitive favorite to win the national championship once again. And by the time you get to February, maybe no one remembers any of this ever happening. So Dogs still on top. Very successful G-Day. Transfer portal open, but Kirby Smart seems content to handle whatever's coming next. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We'll get things going in the morning. Earlier than that, though, on our DawgNation homepage, our DawgNation app. So thankful that thousands of you join us there each and every day. Really a very successful rollout of our newest video platform. We're thrilled to have you there as a part of that. And our extra content, our First and 15, is just our way of saying thank you for that. A unique platform we think we have here at DawgNation to be able to broadcast the show right there on our own side and on our own app. So we're very thankful to all of you for making that such a big deal around here for all of us. And a big thanks to our friends that watch us on, or should say listen to us on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, our podcast, the Apple Player, the Spotify, whichever podcast platform you choose to use. We just try to make the show as available as possible in as many different ways as possible. And we're glad you've at least found one that works for you, whichever that one might end up being. We're also thankful to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, who make today's show possible there as well. Energy-efficient windows and doors. Listen, that matters, especially this time of year when sometimes you get that sort of rainy, stormy weather, wind kind of picks up, bugs, kind of all around. Listen, properly sealed windows and doors keep the outside on the outside where it's supposed to be during the spring time of year. When you've got that air conditioning unit kind of cranked up on the inside, and that is expensive, and that you want to keep that AC kind of inside the house and keeping you cool and comfortable all spring long. That is what our great energy efficient windows and doors can do for you there as well. Keeping the inside where it's supposed to be, nice, cool, and comfortable. Keeping the outside where it's supposed to be, all that whatever's going on outside, keeping it out there where it's supposed to be. Plus, better curb appeal, which can improve your resale value when you're ready to do that. It's just one of the great ways that great homeowners take care of their home with Pella windows and doors. And survey after survey right here in our market area, Pella Window and Door of Georgia has been viewed and recognized as the brand leader over and over. And when you have an experience with a Pella expert, you'll be able to understand why. It's no pressure conversation and consultation. It's simply an explanation, if you will, of what makes the Pella product superior, the entire product line that you can choose for yourself, which option fits you, installation options there as well, financing options if you're in need of that. And how about some special savings too? Between now and May 22nd, you can get 10% off your entire project or 0% APR for 24 months. So a lot of really good savings opportunities out there as well. So here's what I want you to do. Stop by and see them in Duluth in their Experience Center, or find them online at pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. You can also give them a call, 678-638-1429. 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We're going to get a chance to talk to John Stinchcomb here in a moment. John will have plenty to say about G-Day from Saturday, and we'll look forward to getting all of his thoughts. Prior to that, I want to have some of my own G-Day thoughts here for a moment there, too. Let's go around the Dawghouse here for a moment. And obviously going into the game, the thing that we were most curious about, I think for most of us anyway, was how the quarterback competition was going to look. And I think it was fairly clear and fairly decisive that Carson Beck, to me, right now, has the look of Georgia's starting quarterback in 2023. I really haven't talked to a Georgia fan yet that wouldn't join me in saying that based on their own observations there from Saturday. I thought it was a very good day for Carson Beck. I thought one of our commenters said earlier, just sort of looked comfortable in all of this. I thought that was a really good word to use with that. And not only that, I thought it was also pretty instructive that Georgia was comfortable letting this be on display. we were kind of wondering, how much would Georgia be willing to allow in terms of where things stood? Would Georgia orchestrate a quarterback competition and make it seem like it was really close? Would they be okay demonstrating some separation? And the best that I could tell, as Carson, I think, demonstrated himself to be kind of separate and above the other two quarterbacks right now, at least in terms of his readiness to play for September of 2023. Georgia seemed okay putting that on display on Saturday. I think that kind of tells you some stuff there too. But ultimately, the evaluation of what's what and who actually is going to be the starting quarterback, Smart himself didn't exactly reveal a ton of that on Saturday, kind of reserving the right to sort of share some of his opinion on this after he's had more chance to break down the film. This is, though, what Kirby Smart said about his quarterbacks after the game on Saturday. Here's Kirby on that subject post-G-Day.
It's hard because I've got to go back and watch the tape, as always. I thought both of them had good composure, good pocket presence. I thought Brock used his legs several times to break out of there and take off running. Brock, unfortunately, had some guys that dropped the ball on him. I thought the balls were really well thrown and should have been caught. And he did a nice job in the pocket of making those throws. And then Gunner did some really good things. I was really pleased with all three quarterbacks, and what you saw today was, similar to what we've seen really all spring. We have three good quarterbacks who can make the throws and do a really good job. I was pleased with those guys.
So let me kind of say something in light of what Kirby Smart says right there. First of all, when he talks about this, kind of what we've seen during the spring, what that would lead you to believe is that Carson Beck has also maybe been ahead there. If he was ahead on Saturday, and that's what spring practice also looked like, then maybe that's been the story all spring long. We have reason to believe that might be true. But as I say, hey, Carson Beck, to me, I've seen enough to say I believe that Carson's going to be the starting quarterback for Georgia on September 2023 and in this particular season. That's not the same thing as saying that I in any way thought that Brock Vandagriff faltered or I thought that Gunnar Stockton faltered. Frankly, I didn't see anything I disliked from either of those two guys. And I know there was some chatter online about, them maybe for the negative, maybe in comparison to Carson Beck, but I think that's the wrong way of looking at all of this. Right now, Gunnar Stockton's just very young. And when I look at Gunnar Stockton, what I say is, what would Stockton look like with another year of experience under his belt? Could this be a guy that one day is a little bit where Carson Beck is right now? A guy that you would feel very comfortable as your starting quarterback at UGA? You better believe that's true. And I think that if Dylan Raiola comes to Georgia as a five-star in the class of 2024 in some future Georgia quarterback competition, I believe based on what I saw from Gunnar Stockton on Saturday in moments and in flashes and based on some of the stuff we've heard about Gunnar there as well, I think that Gunnar might be more than capable of holding his own in some future competition that might include a five-star like Dylan Raiola. I like a lot about what I saw from Gunnar Stockton on Saturday, and that echoes some of the stuff that we've heard about Gunnar over the course of the last few months there as well. And then similarly, when it comes to my evaluation of Brock Vandagriff, what I looked at from Vandagriff on Saturday, once I was fairly comfortable in assuming that Carson Beck was going to be Georgia's starting quarterback, I then started looking at Brock Vandagriff a little bit differently. I then looked at him from the standpoint of, well, what if he was Georgia's backup this year? And what if Carson had an ankle or an oblique or whatever it is that keeps quarterbacks out of games? What if Georgia had to put Brock Vandagriff into a game? Does Brock have the kind of skill set that would make me feel comfortable that Georgia could build a game plan around exploiting that? His athleticism, we'll hear more from him on that in a moment. His ability to frankly throw the ball pretty well. He had some drops on Saturday, as Kirby Smart acknowledged. Could Georgia build something around Brock Vandagriff if it had to? I think yeah. The answer to that question to me seems to be yes. What I came away thinking on Saturday is that not only does Georgia have, I think, a clear, soon-to-be starting quarterback in Carson Beck, I think they have a potentially capable backup in Brock Vandagriff and also Gunnar Stockton there as well. The quarterback depth at Georgia, to me, seems pretty solid, even if the competition to be the starter also seems pretty clear and cut and dry. It'll be Carson Beck, barring injury, but Georgia could also be in good hands with its backup situation with both Brock and Gunnar, and either one of these guys could be a future starting quarterback, moving on to 2024 or whenever else you want to look into in the future. And both those guys could benefit from more experience as a part of the program. But for now, it's really Beck who has that experience. This is his fourth year being at UGA. He has played a decent amount last season. He has been around this Georgia program, even being around, Mike Bobo some, last year because Bobo was on staff. And all of this, I think, has sort of led to a level of seasoning for Beck as a player. that he simply wouldn't have if he was younger. And I think a lot of that has sort of produced a level of confidence in him that can be contagious for the rest of this Georgia offense. In fact, after the game on Saturday, Carson talked about some of that maturation and the way that all of a sudden now I think he feels pretty poised and pretty in control of the situation when he's running the Georgia offense. This is Carson Beck after the game on Saturday.
I think confidence builds is, like you said, like with reps, and compared from my freshman year to now, my confidence has grown exponentially, and I only see it, growing more from here.
So strong stuff there from Carson Beck, talking about his confidence, and yet from Brock Vandagriff's standpoint, it doesn't seem like he's really lacking in confidence either. I think that Brock left G-Day knowing that he had himself some pretty good moments, and he's comfortable leaving all of this in the coach's hands moving forward. Here is Brock Vandagriff there as well.
Coach Bobo, he punched me on the arm on the way over here on the bus. He's like, dude, let's go, man. And it's just part of it. I told him, I was like, Coach, I probably had 4 bites of food from the time I woke up this morning to now. And the first drive, my heart was throbbing. I guess that shows how much I love it. And just being able to come out here in front of the fan base and being able to move the chains with my team was awesome. And I finally settled in after about the first drive or two. But like I said, that was probably the most reps I've ever had in Sanford. So it was good to get that under my belt.
Brock, do you feel like you kept the competition open today? You feel like you kept the quarterback competition open today with the way you played?
I'm not sure how they're going to see it, but I believe I played my best. And at the end of the day, that's all you can do.
So to me, Brock Vandagriff right there sounds like a quarterback who's a little younger than what Carson Beck is, and that's exactly what Brock Vandagriff is. So it could be that Georgia has a clear starter in Carson Beck. It could be that it still has 2 very intriguing prospects underneath him in Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton, and it could be that the Georgia quarterback situation is returning to a sense of normalcy after what has been a weird series of years for quarterback because of pandemic and opt-outs and injuries and the emergence of a former walk-on that no one would have predicted leading Georgia to the success that it did. That things are now kind of returning to a little bit more of a sense of normalcy, and the progression from quarterback to quarterback year over year over year might become a little bit more sensible and, frankly, a little easier to predict. But ultimately, the overall story for quarterback at Georgia on Saturday was, I believe, a positive one. I think it's clear who your starter is likely to be. That looks like Carson Beck, although Smart did not himself fully state that on Saturday. And guys like Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton also had their moments when they did well, and you're led to believe with more experience, with more training, they could provide even more of those moments in the future. So quarterback was the big story going into Saturday, and ultimately what we saw was actually pretty entertaining and pretty revealing for what the future of Carson Beck could be in a Georgia uniform as soon as this fall. That is Around the Dawghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today, and those are my thoughts on the Georgia quarterback situation. How did a former Georgia All-American view this, though? Let's find out more on that right now as we welcome in John Stinchcomb here to our program today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
John, there's a lot we want to talk to you about, but obviously going into Saturday, the big chatter we knew was going to be the quarterback situation, what has been a competition. We saw Carson Beck, we saw Brock Vandagriff, we saw Gunnar Stockton. What was your ultimate takeaway from what you saw from that trio here on Saturday?
That competition is a good thing. I thought all 3 of the quarterbacks looked good. Obviously, at this point, it seems to be Carson Beck's to lose, and he performed really, really well. You're in spring game. What is that? What metric can you really acquire from just that situation? But I thought all 3 of the quarterbacks did well, and Carson certainly put his stamp on giving fans and coaches another reason to believe that he's the next man up.
Yeah, I'm going to get deep in the weeds on this with you here for a second, because the phrase you used a moment ago, this has been Carson Beck's quarterback competition to lose. That's one of those things I feel like we've said a few times this spring. I know Jake Fromm used that exact phrase a couple of weeks ago here on this show, and I feel like on Saturday it kind of got taken to the next level. It's almost like if you watch like election night coverage or whatever else with like blah, blah % of the precincts reporting. I feel like I've almost seen enough now to say, well, Carson Beck has, for all intents and purposes, won this competition. Smart's not going to acknowledge that yet, but Georgia seemed pretty comfortable showing Carson as the leader on Saturday. He played all of the red team snaps in the first half. That's kind of the thing that a starting quarterback might do. They were sort of okay with Beck having the better numbers, and they put this on display and seemed to be okay with Beck appearing to be ahead of the other two. To me, I've sort of seen enough to call this race. John, have you seen enough to do that?
No, I
Okay.
think it's an opportunity that Beck has earned. I do think that he is showing that he's the lead horse in the race, but I don't think the race is over. I think when you get to training camp, that obviously spring, what happened in spring matters, and you're starting to plan for the season and who you can rely on. And Carson has done what he's needed to up to this point for coaches to feel confident that he'll be ready. Now, I don't think that it's a closed book in that you still have to get through training camp. And I would say even through the season, you've got to perform and continue to prove yourself. I think if nothing else, Coach Smart has shown that it's always an ongoing battle across the board, that what you do in most recently matters. And the quarterback position is no different. I think back to when Stetson first earned his opportunity to prove the player that he was, that it was in the middle of the season. And I think the same holds true for Gunner and Vandagriff in that you can't give up. It's not like, Carson played well in the spring game. I guess that the case is closed and there's no opportunity for me. I think Georgia has shown a propensity to play the hot hand, and if you're not performing well and somebody's practicing well, they'll give them that opportunity.
I think that's really well said and very, very interesting. Let me shift gears to the other big story from Saturday. That was the news that we learned that Bear Alexander was in the transfer portal. Obviously entering the portal, provides the opportunity to still return to UGA. We don't seem to think that's what's going to happen here, though. Looks like Alexander's looking elsewhere. Been some chatter about USC. I guess Texas is maybe involved in this too. But a lot of that speculation, but it seems to be kind of well-placed speculation here for a moment. And, John, one of the things I try to do on our show is, I try to put my biases out there for everybody to see, right? You can know my bias and that you can evaluate my opinions on the basis of my biases. Everyone knows I'm a Georgia fan. This is sort of a pro-Georgia show. I don't make any kind of apologies for that necessarily. And then beyond that, I'm also someone who just really wants to protect the institution of college football. I think that college football is a very good thing, and too much change too soon makes me a little nervous because I think it has the potential to threaten the sport that, has certainly provided you an incredible life, or at least a springboard to an incredible life, and also provided me incredible entertainment over the course of years. So from that standpoint, when a guy like Bear Alexander, who, is we thought kind of an up-and-coming player in the Georgia roster, announcing on the day of G-Day that he's in the transfer portal, we're led to believe maybe some sort of substantial NIL deal could be awaiting him if he transfers somewhere else. I'm not going to pretend that I don't like that, John. And listen, I think that Georgia deserves a lot of credit for not letting this news overshadow G-Day. This is still a very entertaining football game, and this is still a very terrific football team, going to be the preseason number one with or without Bear Alexander. But the sport of college football, I think, comes across not looking so great in a situation like this. And, this is what the portal is, but I don't know, John. I'm not going to smile and put on a happy face about a situation that I just don't love, and I don't love this. So it's your opinion that this particular part of the show matters. So after my little soliloquy there, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, I don't love it, but we don't have to, nor do we get to. It's the same situation when you look at Ra and Dominic when they came to town. That's great for us,
Right.
But the programs that they're leaving, they're going, man, that was a up-and-comer. Same thing with A.D. Mitchell. Now, wide receiver is a little different for us because it seems like we're pretty well stocked in that position group, but it is it's painful when you lose a guy of Bear Alexander's caliber. I think he's the next up-and-coming interior defensive lineman that's a real factor. And when you see him walk out as a Georgia fan, it's got some sting bite to it. And it's part of the reality is it's part of the college football landscape today. I don't like it, but my opinion was not requested when they started looking at transfer portals and NIL deals. And so I think what's noteworthy here is that there is a Georgia way, and the Georgia way is we're going to put team first. We're not going to highlight individuals. We're not going to kowtow to specific stats that folks might be chasing. or NIL deals. I think we've done a great job of being competitive with some of the elites in the NIL game, but there are still going to be programs that are willing and able to entice players away from major programs, Georgia included, by offering richer NIL deals. And that used to not be a factor. It used to be, can I develop as a player? Do you have good facilities? Do I fit in the locker room culture? Those are still factors, but there is a big factor that's been added to the equation that coaches, teams have minimal control over, and that's NIL money.
So let me go down a road with you just for a second, and I don't want to take this too far, but I am curious of your opinion on this. So let's say that you're a little bit more of sort of pro-modern thinker than what I just said there a moment ago. The argument somebody would make back to me based on my dissatisfaction with a guy like this, leveraging transfer portal for an NIL deal on the day of the Georgia spring game, at the conclusion of Georgia spring practice, what that person might come back and say is, okay, well, if you want to remove this from college football, a guy leveraging these things to his benefit, then you're going to have to collectively bargain with these players, and you're going to have to pay them more money for that contractual status, which means making them employees and, kind of on, down the road you go. And listen, John, I'm sort of getting the sense that, traditionalists and things like that are starting to get beat down on this, including a lot of coaches too, where, okay, well, that may be where all this is heading. And yeah, maybe that's if you want more roster stability, if you want less portal chaos, and I would say Alexander doing that, on the day of G-Day is a little too chaotic for me, that if you want to remove that portal chaos from college football, then you got to have employee status, you got to have collective bargaining, you got to have money coming from the TV contracts and things like that, basically paid as employees the same way you would have been when you were, paid by the New Orleans Saints in the NFL. And, John, that's one of those things where, even if that's where this is going, and I believe it probably is to a certain extent, I still say, be careful what you wish for. How many minor league baseball players are happy with the life they have right now? Those are future major leaguers who, are employees now too, and I'm not really quite so sure that a lot of them are loving it necessarily. And on you can kind of go with examples of that where, hey, being a young sort of pre-major league level professional is not always the most glamorous life. And that may be kind of where college football is going too. And it seems to me the same people who never consider unintended consequences for anything are also sort of failing to consider the unintended consequences with this, but that nonetheless may be where all this is heading.
Yeah, I think this is a case of you don't want what you think you want. And that means if you become employees, the analogy of NIL deals and transfer portals is like free agency is it's incorrect. In free agency, you're a free agent once, and you sign a contract. And there is buy-in from both sides. It also means that team can cut you and that you can be without a home. It also means the way college athletics is set up right now. If you want to pay players, you know what that means? It means the removal of other sports. Guess what pays for almost all of the other sports, not just at Georgia, but across almost every college landscape there is football. Now, there's exceptions to the rule. There are some sports that are self-sustaining and others that make profit. I get that. But in general, when you're talking about a college campus that offers 20-plus scholarship sports available at a university, a lion's share of that is paid through what is brought in from college football. And you take that away and you give it to individuals. You make them employees, and that changes the dynamic. The Title IX opportunities, the opportunities for other sports, not just female student athletes, but other sports that are less recognized and less supported by fan bases, those go away. And I don't think anyone wants that. I don't think people recognize the cost of what we're discussing right now. You want to pay players, you want to make them employees, you want to collectively bargain with them, then that's a totally different dynamic. And I think the correct analogy is minor league sports that might be affiliated with a university, but that no longer is that dynamic the same. It is a much different model and one that is unprecedented. The closest precedent that's been set is minor league baseball. And I'll go to a Gwinnett Stripers game from time to time, but I'm no loyalist. And most fans are loyalist to their universities and their school. And you start messing with that dynamic, and I think that's a road that many, many folks don't want to go down or regret if they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the example of women's basketball here really quick, where we just saw huge TV ratings for the women's Final Four. Now, some of that was because there are some very popular players that happen to be playing this year's women's tournament, but I think it's pretty telling how much more popular women's college basketball is in the WNBA. For people who like women's basketball, they just seem to prefer the college game more so than the WNBA. At least the TV ratings would lead us to believe. And, John, that to me speaks directly what you're talking about there is, which there is a level of marketability that college sports have. You know, the old cliche about the name on the front of the jersey being more valuable than the name on the back. That, you know, a marketable player wearing a college jersey is just more valuable than a marketable player wearing a professional jersey in some respects. Minor league baseball is a perfect example of that. I would say that women's basketball is a stark example of that.
Yeah, and WNBA, you're talking about the most elite basketball playing women in the world. And, you know, I think you've seen some bump in their rating over the years collectively, but it doesn't hold a candle to what collectively is being done in the NCAA and specifically the Final Four. I saw or read an article about that very thing. And, you know, we're slightly off topic here, but it does reflect back to school loyalty, number one, and number two, the opportunities that are created for, you know, at Georgia, there's over 500 plus, 550, 600 almost, student athletes that are on scholarship, that are given an opportunity to be at the University of Georgia, and to remove one of the main contributors, main sources of resources for that to occur, in that you redistribute, let's call it, what's being brought in away from the athletic department and towards individuals. That is a huge unraveling of what the entire system is built on, and I think is a much bigger step than many people realize when they say, oh, they should just pay players.
No, I think you're exactly right. Let me get back to G-Day to kind of close out our conversation here, John. Outside of quarterback, what else jumped out to you? I'm going to kind of make this as broad as possible here. You know, you have a very keen eye on some of this kind of stuff. What else did you notice about what Georgia put on display on Saturday that you found particularly interesting?
Yeah, I think first off, I think we're in good hands offensive line-wise.
Yeah.
You watch really 4 out of the 5 at that left tackle spot, I think is still competitive, but your first 4 out of the 5 starters are exceptional and you know, above average as a group, and you saw that. It also jumped out to me the number of inline tight ends or close bunch sets that you have at the end of the line where, you know, Georgia has the option to be physical. And I think that played itself out in the number of play-action passes that occurred and just the amount of respect that a defense has to have in the run game. So both personnel and scheme-wise, there were some things that say that, you know, Georgia is really well situated. You look at some of the younger outside linebackers, Damon and Gabe specifically.
Yeah.
You know, they had flashes of, man, that their high end, their quick twitch, their athleticism, and what they're bringing to the table is really exciting to watch how that develops.
John, that's all really, really good stuff, and boy, a fun conversation for us to have in the weeks to come about how Georgia gets all that ready for the 2023 season, which will actually be here before we know it. So we always appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Likewise, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, I'm going to try to explain without completely boring everybody a little bit of what John and I were just kind of talking about there for a moment, because let's say somebody like me, a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit of a traditionalist, and let's say I come out and say, hey, I don't like the fact that a player like Bear Alexander can leverage the transfer portal, go get a deal somewhere else, and basically just sort of bolt Georgia at the end of spring practice. Whether he was fitting in well here or not, a lot of people are going to say, I don't like that part of the college football system right now. And so what the person who's in favor of the current changes coming into the system, what they would say in response to that is, and this is a fair point, I'm trying to reflect the other side of this opinion here for a moment, and maybe sometime in the days to come we'll bring on somebody else to the show who just feels differently about this than I do and let them, argue, that side of this just so we can have, kind of both sides represented here. But what that person who's kind of pro-change, what they would say is, okay, well, if you want to restrict the players' rights like Bear Alexander, if you want to eliminate this portal chaos, if that's important to you and you want to do that, then you're going to have to provide some sort of compensation to players for restricting their rights. That it's not legal to say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this without giving some sort of compensation related to that. That's why in professional sports you hear all the time about the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, and sometimes there's a work stoppage. There's in years past there may have been a strike or a holdout or a lockout or whatever else, because of the collective bargaining agreement that comes to an end. That's how it is the NFL can say, okay, well, you don't get free agency years until this, and you don't get this until that. They negotiate all of that in exchange for certain compensation for players. That is the collective bargaining agreement that's in place there. There is no collective bargaining agreement in place for college football because right now the players aren't employees. So in order to be able to restrict their ability to kind of just bolt for a team anytime they want to, there is a certain legal perspective that says if you want that to be the case, then you have to make these guys employees and you have to start paying them a lot more money, not NIL opportunity, but actual money coming from the revenue generated by college football, which primarily is the TV part of this. And as I said before, even for people who are kind of by nature traditionalists and by nature protectors of the institution, even a lot of those people are kind of getting beaten down on this. We're like, you hear more coaches saying, I guess we're going to have to do this, or let's just go ahead and do this and get it over with, whatever else. That even people who by their nature might be traditionalists or, protectors of the institution, even they are getting beaten down to the point, all right, go ahead and make the players employees. But for those people who want to stand on the table and celebrate the players getting a win on this, I'm just telling you, be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you assume is going to be all good. There are unintended consequences that go along with everything. And I'll cite a couple of quick examples here, and then we'll move on. Do you think in a future world in which college football players are employees, do you think college teams are going to want 85 employees? No, they are not. The NFL has a 53-man roster. I believe in the future, in a future world in which college football players are viewed as employees, teams just aren't going to want 85 employees because at the level underneath Georgia, the same people who can't pay for anything now, they can't pay for that either. They won't be able to afford to pay for 85 employees. They just don't have enough, there's just not enough money for them to do it, or they're not interested in operating, a budget that large, whatever you want to describe it. But there won't be 85 college football players on rosters in the future, if you want to look ahead to a world in which the players are employees. I believe that to be true because the NFL has far fewer players on its roster than college football does. That ought to be viewed as a little bit of a model here. And then beyond that, there are a lot of you who very much value your degree from the University of Georgia. You kind of like the idea that a football player on the Georgia roster is going to the same school that you went to, or maybe that you're going to right now. There's a certain kinship you feel with all of that. But in a future in which players are employees, here's what you have to ask yourself a question about. Employees of whom? Or employees of what, I guess maybe is the better way to say that. Who employs them? It can't be the University of Georgia, not on the basis of Title IX, because if you do that, then theoretically you'd have to pay, other sports the same thing you pay the football players, despite the fact that the other sports don't bring anywhere near the revenue the football team does, and from a sort of P&L standpoint, they don't bring any, real profit at all. They cost a lot more than they provide. And so from that standpoint, that in a future world, if players are employees, they can't be employees of the University of Georgia. They'd have to be employees of something else, like the SEC or some sort of entity that's not bound by the same sort of Title IX laws that the University of Georgia would find itself kind of bound to. So in that future world in which the players that play for a school like Georgia are actually employed by some other entity, then are they still even students anymore? Like, what would their connection be to the University of Georgia? At that point in time, the idea of wearing the name Georgia is really nothing much more than a licensing deal. And if players could negotiate money for themselves, could they negotiate the idea of not even have to go to school at all? At that standpoint, it kind of becomes more like a minor league sport. And I'm here to tell you this. There is no minor league sport anywhere that's all that successful. Minor league baseball contracts year after year after year. What that means is there are fewer teams. Teams go out of business, and you can read 1,000 stories out there about minor league baseball players having to fight just for enough money to put food on the table. Like, that's not that is not a lucrative world to be in for a lot of players who are playing, minor league baseball. And I'm assuming that, the NBA G League, things like that are pretty much the same way, because you never hear a word about it. It is not a thriving TV product. It's not a thriving sport. No one cares about it anywhere at all. And if someone was capable of producing a successful kind of minor league version of football, they'd already be doing it. They'd be competing for college football with the talent that's out there, and they'd be running a thriving business. But instead, all these spring football leagues that would theoretically be kind of a precursor to all this, USFL, XFL, whatever the ones last year that are 2 years ago that kind of folded up, none of these leagues ever seem to really be able to get off the ground because there's just not a ton of money in minor league sports. So if you turn college football into a feeder system for the NFL, nothing more than just a minor league version of football, then you run the risk of college football one day being no more successful than in any of the rest of the minor league sports that are out there. That might be a fatalistic viewpoint, but it's not entirely impossible to imagine a scenario in the future that could one day be true. So all of this may be heading towards that, and there's also a chance that things end up not being quite as bad as I'm describing them here right now. But I think you've got to fully consider all of the various possibilities in place if all of this change starts happening the way that it seems like it's progressing here right now. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. Now, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here real quick. I'll remind you that our Dog Nation cruise is next week. I am so excited about that. On board, Independence of the Seas, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay. And the same way we're going to be enjoying this next week, so many of you have your own chances to enjoy your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here this summer. So give a great travel agent, Jessica Slater, a call at 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She can get you booked up, whether you want to do, like we're going to do, the 4-night cruise on Independence of the Seas. Independence also has some 3-night options. There are other ships going to have similar itineraries right there to Port Canaveral. You can do Mariner of the Seas there too, kind of Independence's sister ship. And, she's kind of got some of those same itineraries in place there. You also got like Fort Lauderdale or Miami, if those ports are more convenient for you. Really, ports all across the country, but certainly in the state of Florida, just down the road from us, you got, Port Canaveral, which I love going out of, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. You may want one of those 7-night sailings on one of the Oasis class ships. Boy, that was a lot of fun for me this past February, and looking forward, of course, to January of 2024. And the debut of Icon of the Seas there as well. That is going to be amazing. So make sure you find out more online. Jessica's put a great website together. It's royaldogs.com. That's royaldogs.com. You can kind of live vicariously through those of us who are going to be a part of our Dog Nation cruise next week, and you can use that as motivation to plan your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here this summer, or heading towards the holiday season, fall, winter. Not too soon to start thinking about that there as well. All right. Let's roll through here for a moment. Lane Kiffin, we had you on Friday's show. A little fun at the expense of the lousy, stinking Gators. We never hate that. Lane Kiffin's back doing it again there as well. Now, I did not see the Ole Miss spring game. I guess at some point in time I'll try to watch some of it. But I saw Kiffin on Twitter put this out there. First of all, we got the red team beat the Navy team 53-52. That is quite a spring game score there. I don't quite know what they did to amass more than 100 points in Oxford on Saturday, but Lane Kiffin on Twitter said, points. And then he kind of gave you the Gator emoji and the football and the fire emoji. You'll remember last Friday, he was mocking Florida for its 10-7 spring game, which the two quarterbacks only combined for 2 total touchdowns all day long. So Kiffin comes back and trolls Florida. Again, we don't hate that. Kiffin's not necessarily our favorite guy, but if he's trolling Florida, he's at least doing something right. So good job to Lane Kiffin there. Speaking of coaches soon to be in the SEC, Steve Sarkisian made an interesting announcement on the heels of the Texas spring game on Saturday, acknowledging that Quinn Ewers will be the starting quarterback for Texas. Now, this to me is instructive. First of all, we'd been hearing this a little bit lately, that for all the attention Arch Manning had gotten, that Ewers was really pulling away in that Texas quarterback competition. He was going to be the starting quarterback. That is indeed the case. That doesn't change Manning's future. He's still a very bright prospect, of course, but this was going to be Quinn Ewers' job, and it is. And I think Sarkisian in this particular instance is kind of instructive in that we're led to believe that coaches are going to do whatever they can to kind of keep competitions going, keep them alive, orchestrate them if need be, take them into the season, because you want to kind of give mystery about who your starting quarterback is going to be, and you obviously want to keep every quarterback in the program, believing they have a shot and thinking it could be them as the starter. That way they don't transfer. That's what we're sort of led to believe is the thing that coaches should do, and some coaches seemingly do that. However, what we've also said from time to time on this show is that sometimes there is value in the opposite. That sometimes if you know who your starting quarterback is going to be, acknowledging what you know, there is some value in doing that. Part of that is just based on the fact that players are not stupid. They're watching practice each and every day, and if they see Quinn Ewers, a little older, a little bit more experienced, if they see him being better in practice than Arch Manning is, then Sarkisian actually does a disservice to himself in front of his players by pretending something publicly is true when it isn't. So from that standpoint, you got to be careful about the message you send publicly. If it doesn't line up with what your players are seeing privately, that puts your credibility on the line. And I think that Steve Sarkisian, in a roundabout way, probably knew that. But there's also this, and this is what's important, which is when you acknowledge this guy as our starting quarterback, you kind of move out of the competitive phase and more into the development phase. And at a certain point in time, developing an offense around your quarterback is a big part of what every football team, has to do. And so now Texas has sort of raised its hand that says, we have our starting quarterback. It's going to be Quinn Ewers. We're going to start developing this team around him for this year. And then it provides an invitation for the players themselves to kind of rally around Ewers as their leader. There is value in naming your starting quarterback if you know who it is, even as early as spring practice, in a way that some coaches don't always do. So I think that's kind of interesting. So similarly, if you want to kind of bring this back to Georgia here for a moment, the Georgia competition between Beck and Vandagriff may have been a little closer than what it was between Ewers and Manning. Maybe that's the case. But if things were as clear-cut as some of us thought it was on Saturday, and for what it's worth, John Stinchcomb gave a pretty strong articulation of why he thinks that Vandagriff is actually still in this competition. I take John's words pretty seriously on that. But others have seemed to say they thought that Beck was probably the better of the two there on Saturday. So kind of deciding when, Kirby Smart kind of takes time to acknowledge that and says, hey, we're rallying around Carson. We're going to build this team around Carson. We're going to kind of put an offense together around Carson Beck. Beginning that process over the course of the summer, I think is maybe important. And one of the things that Carson Beck did talk a little bit about on Saturday after the game, and something that Kirby Smart talked about as well, is kind of what that means in the summer. We'll have Jake Fromm on the show tomorrow. We'll talk to him more about that there too. So you may not get the named starter at Georgia that you seem to get at Texas with Quinn Ewers, but the operation being pretty similar, where Carson Beck acts as if he'll be the starting quarterback, and maybe Georgia treats him as if he'll do that. Maybe functionally ends up being kind of the same there as well. But interesting to see Steve Sarkisian at Texas doing what some coaches don't always do. He says, listen, we got, potentially two good quarterbacks, Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers, but right now it's clear who our starting quarterback is going to be. Ewers, probably the guy that a lot of folks around Texas thought it was going to be to begin with. Sarkisian acknowledging that was pretty interesting. And then finally, I mentioned for a team in Auburn that I think hopes to bring in a lot of transfer players here during this portal window. Interesting to note, they also had kind of a high-profile exit into the portal there as well. Jeffrey, is it Mumba? I think how you say it, not to be confused with Samuel Mpemba. This is Jeffrey Mumba, former big-time junior college defensive lineman that came to Auburn a year ago, has entered the portal here right now. So in addition to kind of seeing what might happen next with Georgia, portal staying open until April 30th, we'll also be watching for other big names entering the portal from around the rest of the SEC there as well, including the defensive lineman there from Auburn there too. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, one of the other things that happened very interestingly on Saturday was the debut of Georgia's 2022 national championship rings, obviously acknowledging the back-to-back nature of Georgia as a championship status, or as we say around here, go for 2 and 22. They accomplished that mission, and our good friend Logan Booker from 960 The Ref put this out on Twitter there as well. One side of the 2022 championship ring also has the score of the Peach Bowl, Georgia beating Ohio State 42-41. And what you see is the Peach Bowl trophy kind of resting on the clock striking midnight with confetti coming down. You'll remember that kind of viral moment from that game in which the Ohio State missed field goal at the very end there came exactly as the clock struck midnight. So that's kind of celebrated here on the side of this championship ring, which I think is really nice. It'll give Ohio State fans one more thing to whine about, which I guess they don't need much of an invitation to do anyway. But very, very cool to see that as a part of the Georgia championship rings. Golden shoe to Logan Booker for pointing that out, and to Georgia for creating kind of a cool ring there. And by the way, lousy stinking Gators, they haven't had a championship ring since 2008. Folks, that is a long time ago now. And even more bad news is 194 days from now, Georgia beating up on them again right there in Jacksonville. You'll have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right. So let's get some of your comments here. And I'm going to go YouTube first, and then we'll kind of roll through here and just sort of give everybody a shot to have their say on everything here today and see how everybody's doing. And then we probably won't go crazy long just because I got to do some stuff today. I got to go to my kid's school later on, so we got a pretty busy day. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, I hope if Big Bear goes somewhere else, he has a good idea to cover up the Big G he has tattooed in his arm. Yeah, he does have that. We have seen that over the years. You know, players get the tattoo of the one place and go somewhere else. Was it Reuben Foster at Alabama that had the Auburn tattoo? I know somebody played at Alabama that had the Auburn tattoo. Was that Reuben Foster that did that? So Alexander would not be the first to do that, to have the tattoo of a place that he did not go. And I'm sure a lot of folks kind of have, regrettable tattoos. Maybe Bear Alexander would not be the first there on that. Foster Moss says, CBA in the bookstore. That guy is a superstar. Well, Foster, you're nice to say that. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming by on Saturday. Tried to say hello to as many people as we could. You there before the show started, and I just enjoyed hanging out with a bunch of Georgia fans. It was a great day. We had a great crowd kind of up there around the bookstore there for that. It was a lot of fun. So, Foster, you're really nice to say that. Paul Moon says that was Reuben Foster. Thank you. Christy mentioning Mekhi Muse. That's one of those names that we'll get into in the next few days. It's going to take us a few days to unpack everything from G-Day. He was fantastic. And Kirby said he does that in practice every single day, which is pretty cool. And eventually earning a scholarship, that might be one of those things he gets a chance to do. He was certainly very good. Oh, Dan Judson saying Eric Gilbert and Bear Alexander are cousins. No, I don't know if that's the case. I'd also say that Gilbert's transfer situation very, very different than Bear Alexander's. Very different. Spencer Clark says Bear Alexander showed you why student athletes need to be held to some type of obligation to teach to hang in there until your time comes. I agree with that. I think that, look, to me, and somebody said this on Saturday at one of our shows, or maybe they just said this to me in person, that college football is still about, there is still a portion about college football, a good bit of college football. It's about training for life. It's about, training for that next phase of life. And, I one of the things I've always loved about college football is I think that college football makes men. I just do. I think that college football makes men. And emulating the things that college football values is a good way to just be a better man or raise a better man for those of you who have boys. That's one of the things that makes college football really, really valuable. And turning tail and running at the first sign of adversity is not a good way to make men. It's just not. It's just not. And so if we lose the training aspect of college football, then we have lost something. We really have. We've lost something that's made the sport special. That's just true. But the person who feels the exact opposite of me is then going to argue, and we have to consider this argument. They're then going to argue, well, if you want to restrict their ability to move around and go different places, you've got to give them some sort of compensation for that restriction of their trade, that restriction of their freedom of movement, whatever else. That legally you got to do that. And lately it seems like that's what the courts have certainly been siding with, that there has been a tremendous sea change. Courts oftentimes reflective of larger public opinion. And in this particular case, there has been a tremendous sea change against the idea of the traditional college sports amateur model. For years and years, the courts were kind of on the side of that. In the last couple of years, that has all changed dramatically, very, very quickly, reflecting, I think, a little bit of a change in public opinion too. So that's what the person who feels differently than some of us would argue. Well, if you want to tell them they can't go play so and so, or if you want to tell them they can't, they got to stick it out somewhere 2 to 3 years, you got to pay them something to do that. And that's where you kind of get into the sort of the new complications. I have really fought against or tried to resist the notion that college football players are about to become employees, because I mean, it's hard to sort of talk about this, like getting into stuff that doesn't, belong in a college football conversation. But I don't know that making these football players employees is going to ultimately make the majority of them happy in the long run, and that's one of the reasons why I've tried to kind of resist it. but resistance may truly be futile. It may just be on its way. And, buckle up for all of the consequences, both intended and unintended, when that goes down. HR Picking Stuff says, is it a coincidence that USC just announced 2 new NIL groups for the future last week? Yeah, maybe it is. I'd asked Jordan Addison how he felt about his NIL experience at USC. At one point in time, he was talking about not getting the money he was supposed to get. So, Bear might want to check in. If that's indeed where he's going, there's been some chatter that he might. If that's indeed where he's going, then he might want to kind of find out how some of those other USC guys felt about their NIL situation. Because I don't know that, at least at one point in time, I think that Jordan Addison was trying to talk to the manager there for a minute. Michael Dykes, at this particular case, I'm of the assumption that Bear Alexander probably leaves. I am. Let's see what else. AKA says that Brock just looks to stare down his receivers a little too long. Maybe that's the case. I thought that Brock probably had more good moments than bad on Saturday. And as I said before, part of my evaluation of him is kind of imagining how much better he would look with one more year of experience in the program, too. Let's see what else. Did Jalen Hurts just sign a big extension? Well, there you go there. That's one of the things that's kind of benefited the Eagles. Now, listen, I guess I'm happy for Jalen getting his money. And I don't mind telling you, he's turned out to be a much better NFL quarterback than I thought that he would. But that's going to impact the Philadelphia Eagles, but if what I'm reading there is correct. Because, it seems like you got 2 ways to win in the NFL. You can either have the best quarterback in the league and you pay him that way, because if you got the best, you're probably going to have to. Or you can have the rookie quarterback who's playing at a pretty high level, but you're not paying him a ton of money, therefore you've got a lot more salary cap space to use on something else. And Philadelphia's kind of been the latter example of that. They've had competent quarterback play coming from someone on a rookie deal. All of a sudden now, Jalen Hurts just got much more expensive. Now, I don't know how 255, kind of fits into the overall salary cap world which we're living in, because the NFL cap has gotten way, way bigger. But a little bit different to have a little bit more difficult to have as deep a roster as the Eagles have had once you start paying, Jalen Hurts, that larger non-rookie style contract. Jordan Bowman says y'all got any spare receivers. Apparently, Clemson looking in the market for receivers here. Well, listen, getting the chance to play Garrett Riley, I'm imagining that's going to be attractive to somebody, I'm imagining. Ridgefly says, are you sick seeing A.D. Mitchell ball out in a Texas spring practice? I guess I did see that one video clip that everybody seems to be talking about. And I said this during the show. The difference between A.D. Mitchell and Bear Alexander is the difference between a maker and a taker. A.D. Mitchell helped make Georgia national champions in 2021. Does Georgia win that game if Mitchell doesn't make the great catch in the end zone against Alabama? I'm not quite so sure they did. So Mitchell may be balling out at Texas, and obviously I'd love to have had it in a Georgia uniform. But to me, A.D. Mitchell, that's DGD. That's a guy who put his fingerprints on a huge win against Alabama. So if Texas is where he wants to be, and if he gets more money for going there than he could have gotten for staying here, I may not love it, but when Mitchell comes back one day, let's say 2031 for the 10-year anniversary of the 2021 national champions, does A.D. Mitchell get a standing ovation for me? Yeah, he still does. Does Bear Alexander individually get a standing ovation for me if it's leaving like he is right now? If things play out the way they appear to be right now? No. Bear Alexander's not a DGD. Bear Alexander's not leaving the same way that A.D. Mitchell is. I said before, it's the difference between a maker and a taker. A.D. Mitchell, I think, gave more to Georgia than he got because he made such a huge touchdown catch, whereas I think that Bear Alexander was a net negative on the program. He got a lot of development. He got a lot of training. There's a monetary value for the level of training that Bear Alexander got. Now he's going to take it with him to a place like USC that doesn't have the foggiest clue how to do that with its own defensive lineman. So, yeah, if USC is where he indeed goes. So you better believe that's the case there on that. You better believe that's the case. Jonathan Aaron said that Ole Miss just showed the country they can't play defense. So was that like real football? Because a lot of these teams have very odd scoring systems for their spring games. Was Ole Miss playing real football where you get a touchdown worth 6 points and an extra point worth 7 points, and they had 100-something points in their spring game? If so, that's pretty wild. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. It'd help if I spelled DawgNation right. Hold on. Let me see what folks are saying over there. All right. On Facebook here just for a moment. Brandon Griffin says, you know who's not upset about Bear leaving? Those young, hungry freshman defensive linemen. Yeah, I mean, listen, that's the thing is like, next man up is the biggest cliche in the world, but Georgia is a next man up type program. And listen, we'll play the clip, I'm sure, again. Go back and listen to what Terrence Edwards said the other day about seeing Jordan Hall. Now, Terrence is you talk about biases. Now, Terrence, he loves offensive football. He's a wide receiver. He coaches with the offensive side. So, for Terrence to be that enamored by a defensive guy, you better believe that guy must have been doing something. And Terrence Edwards, weeks before we, had any, glimmer of a thought that Bear might be leaving, Terrence was raving about Jordan Hall. So, yeah, is there a chance that Jordan Hall is just as good a prospect and maybe a better overall fit on this Georgia roster? Yeah, there's a very good chance that's the case. Is Georgia going to still have the best defensive line in college football? Yes, it will. We'll hear more from Kirby Smart on that topic probably tomorrow. So 100%. Robert Hosea says, I'm also excited for Zion Logue. Me too. Zion Logue is, I would say, less famous than Bear Alexander is, but anyone who's stuck it out at Georgia this long is a very valuable commodity for this program. You better believe that's the case. That's one of the things that Kirby was talking about before with, what was he said? How cohesive this team is and how when people travel over to watch Georgia practice play, they're, blown away by how much these guys embrace the hard work and the competitive nature of practices. Well, Zion Logue is one of the guys who's doing that. So, Logue may not have, the attention of former, recruiting scouts the way that Bear Alexander did, but one guy has, a very important skill set to his sort of list of attributes. The fact that he is capable of withstanding as many years as Zion's been at Georgia, yes, that makes him very valuable. Anthony White said Bear went and took a bag. It is what it is. So while I am not going to jump up and down and celebrate Bear Alexander on this, I also am not necessarily individually upset with him for leveraging the system for his benefit. I guess I'm not individually upset with him on that. I don't love the system. And frankly, my unhappiness today, the extent that I have any, is really kind of more related to the system. Honestly, Georgia's going to go 15-0 this year. Bear Alexander will be a faint memory by the time you get to whatever happens to the college football playoff. Georgia is not going to sweat losing Bear Alexander for 6 seconds, not 6 seconds. So, I don't have any sort of whatever. I mean, this is not, any kind of dissatisfaction there. But as a college football fan who's, loved this sport for a long time, it's the system that I'm a bit concerned about. Kaylee Mansell, do you have something you want to say? Oh, no, I thought Kaylee was going to say something.
I can.
Well, by all means,
I do have some thoughts on this. I agree with you. I don't think that Bear Alexander leaving has a huge effect on us. In the world of NIL, you've got to respect somebody going in, getting their bag, but the timing of it all tells me everything that I need to know. He could have left the program, transferred. I don't think there would have been any bad blood between him and the fan base. Because I agree, UJ is going to go 15-0. It's not going to have an impact. But when you drop that information right before the spring game, I mean, that leaves people with a bad taste in their mouth. So that tells me everything I need to know right there. But I ultimately don't think it's going to affect our season. Just the timing of it all was a little shady, in my opinion.
1,000,000%, Kaylee. I think that's really well said. Craig Jones, by the way, and sorry I put you on the spot. I thought you were about to say something. I apologize for misreading your cue. Craig Jones says, people complaining about the defense from Saturday have to realize they were going a little easy in the tackling. Yeah, we said this all spring long. I went on Saturday to watch the offense play. I don't want the Georgia defense doing to Georgia's offense what it does to everybody else. I don't want them doing that. Georgia's defensive linemen pick up quarterbacks and throw them over their shoulder and parade them around like a trophy. I don't want that defense trying to do that to this offense. I just don't. So, the Georgia offense can play full speed against the Georgia defense, but I don't want the Georgia defense playing full speed against the Georgia offense. And the difference is the Georgia offense playing full speed doesn't necessarily get anybody hurt. If the Georgia defense goes out there and does to the fullest extent of its capabilities, somebody's going to get hurt. I don't want that happening. I want Georgia's defense showing its teeth. I want that to come September 30th against Auburn, certainly in November against Tennessee. I don't want that against the Georgia offense. I don't want Georgia doing to quarterbacks what it does to quarterbacks all the time. So, yeah, at least 4 starters out, I think. The rules don't favor the defense anyway. Schematically, they're showing you nothing. There's also a part of me that thinks that's why Dominic Levitt didn't have a huge game on Saturday. That could have maybe been an example of Georgia not wanting to reveal that too much to the world. But yeah, it was not a great day in the first half for the first team Georgia defense, so to speak, against the first team offense. I don't care about that at all. I don't. I wanted to see the offense, 100%. By the way, Jamie Kennedy, I saw Jamie on Saturday too. He says, how do you feel about Christian Miller finally getting a shot? Yeah, I'm hoping for good things for Christian. I like him a lot. And my guess is there are going to be a lot of guys kind of rotating in and out, and I do think that Miller has a chance to be one of those. William Camacho says, understand there's a chance that Bear Alexander could wind up at USC. That's what the internet seems to be saying. I think I told somebody this wrong the other day too. I don't remember if this is on air or off air, but I guess that you had to have been in the transfer portal by February 1st to transfer somewhere in the SEC. So I don't know if there's any kind of SEC rumor for Bear Alexander anyway. Future SEC team like Texas maybe a little bit, but current SEC team, I don't know. There's been much of a rumor on that. So, people seem to be saying USC. I don't have any reason to dispute that. Mike Mazzell says our defense didn't play well, but we're still going to be an elite defense. Yeah, I mean, there is zero about this performance defensively for Georgia that translates at all to the season. Zero. Y'all, I have very, very high hopes for this Georgia defense this year. Robert Hosea says, I say that Bear Alexander is going to go to Texas. Could be the case. I don't know that the Texas NIL fund has actually worked out quite as well as they thought it was going to. Like, think about this. I mean, they got Arch, I guess, but, I'm not quite so sure that Texas has killed NIL-wise the way that some people kind of thought they might. But maybe that, anything's possible, I guess. Johnny Prescott. By the way, good to see Johnny moving over here to the no, I guess Johnny's always on Facebook. I was thinking he was a DawgNation.com guy, but Johnny's always on Facebook. He says, post-G-Day emphasized the depth of the Gators' fall. Can you imagine leaving the spring game infuriated with your team? Yeah, Johnny, I think that's a pretty important point. Obviously, we love making fun of Florida, but it is one of those good things in which, I mean, every Georgia fan I talked to on Saturday was happy. Now, listen, Georgia fans are also highly analytical, so there's well, what about this? What about that? And Georgia fans are watching the game pretty closely, so there's a lot of things they're going to point out, and maybe some of this may end up veering into the world of like nitpicking in the days to come. But generally speaking, every Georgia fan I talked to on Saturday was happy. Georgia's won the last 2 national championships. This team's going to be a preseason number 1. Their season win total is going to be 11.5. Like, you can't be, on paper, much stouter than Georgia's going to be. And I am really glad that we don't have to spend all spring and summer talking about, what about this? What about that? And could we maybe convince a sophomore in high school to come be our starting quarterback this year? Or, something like that. Gnashing teeth because the Tulane quarterback didn't transfer there. And I'm very, very thankful that we don't have to have that conversation because, look, I have the best job in the world every single day, but it is so much more fun to do this job when the conversation is just positive. It just is. And around Georgia, thankfully, most days you kind of get a chance to be that way. The job is easy when there's bad news. You know what you're talking about. But the job is way more fun when there's good news. So, yeah, we get a spring and summer of fun football conversation. Hey, what's going to happen between Ernest Green and Austin Blaski? Or what's going to happen with this? Like, we have a lot of debates where the answer is not necessarily bad one way or another, and I do like that a lot. I like that a lot. Matthew Goodwin says, any chance Bear was asked to enter the portal? I don't believe that's the case. You're going to hear a lot of, there's already some internet stuff out there about, well, he wasn't a good fit and, not getting along with players. And I guess I've also heard some pretty close to the situation, rumblings about that, not too many degrees of separation removed, where some people said, hey, I'm not really quite so sure how great of a fit he was at Georgia. But I'm not that scandalized by that kind of stuff. I said this to our first and 15 audience before the show began today. Not everybody's going to be a team captain. And while ultimately, it's Georgia's culture that I think helped win the national championship for them last year, but at the same time, there is a requisite talent level to even get into the conversation. And so sometimes if a player's talent level's up here and his sort of cultural fit is down here, then you'll take the talent because you got to have the talent. And then in the case of Bear Alexander, that may have been what it was. That, listen, culturally, is this a great fit right now? Is this guy, a future team captain? Maybe not. Is he a future first-round pick and therefore he checks some important boxes for us? Well, you need that on your team there too. So, if your culture's strong enough, then you can tolerate some guys that have a little bit more in the way of talent than they do cultural provision. So that's just sort of a long way of saying is that you may hear some things about, this happened at practice and that was this and this is that. All of that may be true, but I think that Georgia was likely still willing to tolerate all that because he is so talented. And no one disputes that. He is a talented guy. Caleb McCollum mentioning Ra Thomas. Yeah, I think that we have every reason to believe that Ra is going to be, here. And, he obviously was not participating in offense on Saturday. You can read into that what you want to. But Ra is going to be here and be around, and he's going to be doing some things this fall for sure. James F. on YouTube predicting a 3-loss year for the Crimson Tide. If that be the case, then buckle your seatbelts. Johnny Servdog says, I was shocked to see Ernest Green starting at left tackle rather than Amarius Mims. Good for him. He must be balling out. His dad played in the NFL, so he must be fundamentally sound for a young guy. That's one of those things that, who was it? Was it Warren McClendon and those guys? Was it Broderick and Warren both that said this? That was the thing about Ernest that impressed them when he came in a year ago before he got hurt. They felt like he was really polished. That he was, son of an NFL guy and, I guess had some really good training out in California, that they felt like he was pretty put together when he first got here and then he got hurt. As far as like the left tackle, right tackle thing, Mims has been at right tackle. This could just be a situation where they want to keep him where he's been comfortable. A lot of times we think for a right-handed quarterback, a left tackle is sort of the more glamorous position. That might be an interesting question to ask Kirby, how that sort of view, it's like the old thing about the blind side, right? That's, left tackle's the blind side. You're protecting the blind side. How true that really is. That wouldn't be a bad question to ask. Andrew Sisson, another guy that I saw on Saturday. He says, great seeing you at G-Day at the bookstore. Number 32, Cash Jones, looked good at running back. He really did. I'd take Georgia's walk-on running backs over anybody on Florida's roster, I think. Savon Clark, I thought, had a couple decent moments. Cash Jones looked pretty good there, too. So Georgia's got a great collection of walk-on running backs. And, one of the things that you could probably write a book about is Georgia's preferred walk-on program. It's just so built out. I mean, they're just so serious about that. And they've gotten players from their walk-on evaluations. And, they're, a lot of the walk-on stuff sort of takes place after the regular recruiting cycle kind of comes to a close. But Georgia's really serious about that. Like, they're evaluating these walk-on guys, and they're very serious about trying to find, guys that can play, and they succeed in doing that. Mekhi Mew's another example of that. DT says you're off the mark when it comes to culture. He says Kirby Smart is culture first. You are not culture over talent, because if you're culture over talent, then you're not playing for national championship. In other words, you can have a great culture and no talent, and you're going to go 8-4. Creating a great culture is required among the sort of elite level talents that allow you to win a national championship. And just to be frank, I mean, there were a lot of guys in this Georgia team a year ago that I don't know were necessarily huge. I shouldn't say a lot of guys. There were some guys, at least, who were very big on-field contributors that you might say, I don't know really quite what they were doing in terms of contributing to the overall culture. They were participating in it, so from that standpoint, they were going about their business. But in terms of really enhancing and creating the culture, you're okay as long as like the overall mix of positive contributors is high enough. You can tolerate a few guys who are sort of talent first and culture second. You can tolerate some of that because talent is still the name of the game. It is. What we've said is, hey, the Kirby doctrine is you take talented players and you develop them to be physically and mentally tougher than they otherwise would be. That's the Kirby doctrine. You can't have one without the other. You can't just say, hey, give me anybody you want and I'll develop them. That's not how football works. It's not a magic trick. There is a certain requisite level of athleticism, and from that, you can then mold somebody. But it's not talent without development. It's not development without talent. It is both. It is both. But talent is very, very important. You're going to see that in the NFL draft. There will be some players drafted pretty early based far more on their talent and ability more so than what they bring to that locker room. You're going to see some of that. DT says you can't accept malcontents no matter how, no matter the talent, it destroys the culture. Let's see what else. DT says the players are watching what the coaches put up with. Look, generally speaking, I think we probably agree with each other more so than not. But if you take someone who's like a truly great leader at Georgia, like take a Cedric Von Prawn or somebody like that, somebody you would say this is a guy we think is probably doing it really the right way. I mean, if you think everyone is contributing to culture equally on Georgia with an SVP or a guy like that, whatever example you want to cite, that's just not the case. There are some guys that are talented enough you'll kind of tolerate it, and I think there's reason to believe that Georgia maybe had at least one of those or two of those last year. Let's see what else. Paul Moon, the subject of Arch Manning, back on YouTube here for a moment. Yeah, I mean, obviously, with a name like Manning, you're kind of always destined to be the number one overall recruit. Now, some of those services, once he committed to Texas, Arch Manning wasn't number one overall anymore. I think at least one service still did keep him at number one. So, look ahead to year 2, year 3 in a college uniform. Do we see Arch Manning look like the very best player in the country? We might. I think Manning's bigger than some people realize. I think he's slightly more athletic than some people realize. But, Manning did not play against a super high level of competition there in Louisiana, and so that's one of the things he's going to have to deal with. But for right now, Quinn Ewers is just a better quarterback than Arch Manning is. Nature Gator says Steve Spurrier scorched B.A. Psyche back in the 1990s, and he never really quite recovered from it. The actual truth is, I can barely remember the 90s. The actual truth is that we have to go back decades to find any real substantial success for Florida. And boy, I love that being true. Love that being true. But Nature, I'm glad to have you here today. Kenneth Holt says not everyone has to be a Nolan Smith or a Jordan Davis to have good culture. And by the way, speaking of that, I think the thing about this Bear Alexander situation that bothers me the worst, they let that guy wear 99. Like, that's one of those things that, like the only real regret of the whole Bear Alexander era may be the fact they let that guy wear 99. They let that guy wear Jordan Davis's number. That's a disappointment. But I think your overall point's right. That a lot of this is about a tipping point. That what you really need is not just the majority of your players to be good cultural contributors. You really need the overwhelming majority to be. And this happens in pro sports all the time is our locker room strong enough that we can tolerate this? And in some cases, in some cases, teams say, yeah, our locker room is strong enough that we think we can tolerate a guy who brings us what we need from a talent standpoint, but might be a little bit of a tougher guy to deal with when it comes to the locker room situation. Paul Moon says agrees with me. That's the biggest slap in the face with the Bear thing, that JD handed that number down to him. Yeah. I mean, that's a regret right there. And listen, nobody pitches a perfect game in life. Every now and then you have an unforced error. But giving 99 to Alexander is an unforced error. It really is. It really is. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, only thing I had against the defense on Saturday, even though it was a G-Day game and defense had handcuffs on, but the DBs got burned some. They could have turned their head some. Maybe that's the case. I will tell you one, listen, and obviously there are going to be a lot of evaluations of G-Day, and I'm not saying this was reflective of the overall game. I'll tell you what I was really impressed with on Saturday, because I'm not quite so sure this was always necessarily true a year ago. There was one moment in this game in which they tried to throw deep to Lovett, and I thought that Malachi Starks had great coverage, because that's what Georgia wants to do this year with Lovett. They want to try to exploit him against safeties, obviously, when they can get that matchup. And obviously teams like Tennessee, that's what Tennessee likes to do. They like to try to do that little stack route thing. And, one of the reasons why Jalen Hyatt was always so wide open is because they'd kind of do that little deal and, get him on a safety, and he just burned right past him. And if Malachi Starks is running like that, step for step with Dominic Lovett, that's probably a pretty good sign of what Starks is going to be in coverage this year as a safety. So that's just one play from the game. But I did notice that. However, Jonathan says he saw some moments which the coverage kind of got burned a little bit. And that is probably something you could evaluate, because, how you run step for step with the receiver probably matters. But maybe that also means the flip side of that, maybe Georgia has good receivers this year, better on paper than they've been. Maybe that's the case. Let's see what else. Alex Johnson says wide receivers this year going to be a relay team. I loved Arian Smith having 2 touchdowns. I think he's going to be a real problem for the opposition here this year. Let's see what else is going on here. Foster Moss says that Florida signed a TV contract with the History Channel. That's very funny, Foster. Very funny. Crow King 123 on the subject of one of those rumors that's out there. Yeah, I mean, so I will tell you this rumor-wise. I did mention this on the Kroger Kickoff. Like, there was a rumor back in the winter that Bear Alexander was considering doing this then. And, we can't talk about every rumor that's out there, so we didn't really talk about that at the time. But I remember it being pretty well placed and from a rumor mill standpoint. And there's also rumors, well, I heard Bear Alexander did this, and I heard he had this run-in with this guy doing this. And listen, who knows? It may all be true. It may none of it be true. But, listen, I'm like the rest of y'all. I'm on the internet looking for every rumor I can find, but we can't talk about them all. Jerry Dog Fan says, what did you think about the kickers on Saturday? I don't know that I thought much. What did you think? I guess I thought it was cool that Georgia's got a kicker. What was the guy's name? Fantastic name. What was his name? But, yeah, I don't know that I thought much about kicker one way or another. Maybe I should have. All right, we're getting ready to go. Thomas Tyson says that Beck was surveying the entire field and going through his progressions. Yeah, I thought he looked pretty good. Brandon Griffin says, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch Carson Beck's interview with Jeff like 3 years ago. It really shows you how much Beck loved Georgia and why he came here and has stayed. That's a good recommendation. I appreciate that. Joseph Kennedy says he liked that 52-yard field goal. Yeah, was that Zirkle that kicked that one? Yeah, you certainly like that. You certainly like that for sure. Bill Sanders, thanks for checking in here today. Ben Green predicting title bound. I like that. Georgia and Olive says, do you think that the Maverick Top Gun scene was a ripoff of Star Wars? That is interesting. One of my favorite internet conspiracy theories, though, is, have y'all heard this? By now, hopefully you've seen Top Gun Maverick. Seems like everybody in the world probably has. There is a really good theory out there that Top Gun Maverick, that Maverick actually dies at the beginning of the movie, and basically everything that happens after that is kind of his hallucination. And I'm a big Twilight Zone fan, which I know is kind of a dorky thing to say, but I love the Twilight Zone. Like my wife and I usually watch an episode of the Twilight Zone every night to kind of sort of drift off to sleep. It's a very dorky thing to do. I completely acknowledge this, but I've always just liked the Twilight Zone. And so there was an episode of the Twilight Zone that was basically borrowed from the Cannes Film Festival or something. It's called A Disturbance at Owl Creek. And it's actually a really interesting piece of art. And it's very, very different than most episodes of Twilight Zone. But what happens is that there's this guy, Civil War type time, and he gets hung at the beginning of the episode. But in his mind, the rope breaks and he falls in the water, and he basically runs to safety. And that's what the movie is. But then at the very end of the movie, we find out that none of that was real, that he was imagining all of that. And actually, boom, he really did get hung. And there's a pretty, followed theory on the internet that is what Maverick Top Gun was about as well. So we are way off the subject of Georgia football, but that is out there. That is indeed out there. All right, final comments. We'll get ready to go. Robert Hosea says he hasn't seen Maverick yet, so I guess I ruined it for him. Craig Jones, we're glad you're here today there as well. Really appreciate that. Thomas Tyson, impressed with Carson Beck's touch on the ball. Yeah, I think he throws it well. Paul Moon, looking forward to Rosemary Jack Saint. Me too. I think the mixture of guys like that, by the way, Dylan Bell on Saturday looked good. The kind of Dylan Bell, Rosemary Jack Saint, tough receivers. Like those are the kind of wide receivers you wouldn't want to fight. Like Dylan Bell in a phone booth is not going to be fun for anybody. That's a strong dude. And then you sort of mix those strong receivers with like the Aaron Smith, C.J. Smith, Dominic Lovett style speed. They have a good mix of styles in that receiver room right now. TMN says Texas, USC, Ohio State, and Georgia in the playoff, calling it right now. That'd be a pretty fun playoff. If USC is going to get there, they're going to have to stop somebody defensively, something they failed to do a year ago. Dimitri Sullivan, happy birthday. Celebrated a birthday over the weekend. Dimitri, that is awesome. Ridgefly on the subject of Landon Thomas. I feel like some of y'all are talking about this. Like, is that out there? Are people saying he's flipping his commitment? Is that really out there? I have not heard that, but sounds like some of y'all think that because I've had several people mention that in the comment section. Cassie Turner says, I'm excited to see how everyone's doing this season. Cassie, I can't wait that too. Fun roster filled with really interesting players. Can't wait to see it. Let's see what else. Kenneth Holt says George Pickens, another one of those receivers you wouldn't want to fight. Yeah, Pickens knows how to fight. I mean, Pickens is one of those guys. He just knew how to do it. Right? It's like, thankfully, I haven't been in a ton of fights, but sometimes you see some of those online videos that people share where sometimes you can't really tell, and like you just sort of realize, okay, now I'm in kind of now I've got to scrap, and oh no, this guy looks like he's been in a few fights before. He knows what he's doing. There's a certain way people kind of stand when they know what they're doing. Like Pickens, one of those guys. He just knows how to fight. He just knows what he's doing, and that's always tough to deal with for sure. Jerry Dogfest says FSU wants Landon Thomas. Well, keep in mind, Moultrie is a stone's throw from Tallahassee. Moultrie is basically suburban Tallahassee for the most part. Let us see what else. Final comments. We'll bounce out of here. So Randy Hall says that Jeff stated that Landon Thomas's FSU interest is growing. Well, there you go. I do think that they're recruiting better down there right now. There's no doubt about that. Ken Holcomb says that Pickens wanted to fight at the wrong time. It cost us too many yards. Maybe that was the case. Robert Hosea says he went to the Ohio State spring game. They ain't going to the playoffs. Robert, I hope you were there just trolling on behalf of UGA. There you go, Robert. That's awesome. That's pretty good stuff. Ken Holcomb, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. All right, y'all, we got to go. Good stuff. Thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews, Cool Down. Y'all check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. Hawks lost in Boston on Saturday. Came back a little bit in the second half. Braves, though, did finish off the sweep of Kansas City, which you like to see. And now the best record in the National League. Heading for a tough series out west later tonight against San Diego. But the good news is Max Fried's coming back. So you can get all of that online at ajc.com on that. And then check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. So check them out online. Get your air conditioning tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online, rsandrews.com. You want to stay nice, cool, and comfortable spring and summer, all spring and summer long, get that online at rsandrews.com. They'll take care of you on all of that. And we'll see you back here tomorrow, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. across all video platforms after that. Then all of you back here for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down when it's all said and done. You can tell we've gone too long when I start stumbling over my words. So R.S. Andrews Cool Down when the show is done tomorrow. We will see you then there for that. Thanks for being here with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today.